A very warm welcome to those in Europe. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to those in India, Nepal, and across South Asia. This is the third plenary session of this two-day conference, and it's entitled Exploring the EU's Regional Strategy in South Asia. And I think this is a very pertinent topic at this point of time, given the tremendous geopolitical and geostrategic churn of events, which is taking place not just in Europe with Brexit and how it's been consummated, but more importantly within the wider Indo-Pacific context, in which I'm sure there is enough scope for us to have a relook and re-examine as to what kind of a regional interface the European Union is having with South Asia. I will reserve some prefacing comments of myself for a little later, but let me at the outset invite His Excellency, Ambassador Ugo Astuto, who is Ambassador of the European Union to kindly set the tone for this debate with your distinguished address. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you for having me. Well, I think I will start with the obvious that as a European based in Asia, I have no doubt about South Asia's increasing importance, not just in the Asian context, but also to the rest of the world. And this is obviously valid, notably for the EU, one of the largest world economy, an economy open to world trade and exchanges. The close and expanding strategic partnership between the European Union and India can also be seen as an indication of the EU's greater attention and emphasis on South Asia. So there is little doubt that Asia as a continent is emerging as the new global economic and political center of gravity. It already accounts for more than 60% of global growth, if I'm not wrong. It's becoming progressively the manufacturing hub of the world and the front runner of the digital revolution. Some analysts are saying that the pandemic may actually accelerate Asia's ascent. Others are less sure. There still are quite a few potential obstacles ahead before Asia can claim the 21st century as Asian century is a certainty. Among these obstacles, well, we have seen the pandemic now, the digital transformation, and of course, challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss. But also governance issues. The European Union has been boosting its engagement with Asia, with the continent in the last decade, and we have adopted strategies on strengthening connectivity, for instance, between Europe and Asia, and on enhancing security cooperation. And we are looking at ways to step up our engagement in and with the wider Indo-Pacific region, particularly working with like-minded partners to uphold the rules-based system of world governance underpinned by democratic values, a system which must remain open and inclusive. We have a growing strategic partnership with India and well-established cooperation and trade and political relations with all countries in the region. The European Union remains one of South Asia's largest trading partners and a major development aid donor. SAARC would have been one natural entry point for a more comprehensive EU approach to the region, following the pattern that the EU has adopted, for instance, in Southeast Asia with ASEAN. As you may know, the European Union and ASEAN have just upgraded their ties to a strategic relationship last December. It's a relationship, the one with ASEAN, which has evolved gradually from an initial focus, particularly on trade and economic matters. It has broadened and now includes security, climate change, connectivity. It has taken time to get there, and it has not always been easy. But I think that this partnership between the EU and ASEAN sends a strong message, a signal, that regional integration can work based on a cooperative approach to international relations. Now, I think we understand the challenges that SAARC faces, and why it has achieved only limited results in the past few decades. In South Asia so far, the fact is that trade has not served as an effective incentive for more cooperation. Unlike what has happened in Europe with the European Union and in Southeast Asia with ASEAN. So South Asia today remains one of the least integrated sub-regions in the world, and intra-regional trade remains far below its potential. Now, the European Union is, for obvious reasons, a champion of regional cooperation and integration. It's natural for us to look at ways to work together with South Asia to strengthen multilateral institutions and to uphold the rules-based order. The phase we are living through, the current COVID-19 pandemic and global health crisis, I think is a good case in point. We are all facing the same challenge, and it has become ever more apparent that we cannot fight the pandemic effectively without international solidarity and cooperation. So it was encouraging to see SAARC leaders coming together in March on initiative of Prime Minister Modi to discuss how to fight the pandemic in the region together. And the rollout of vaccines internationally will also require a global commitment. As you know, the European Union and its member states are among the principal supporters of the COVAX initiative to provide equitable access to COVID vaccines for all, irrespective of where they live. And India, as a global pharma hub, has a key role to play. We have already seen major initiatives taken in this respect in the past few days. Infrastructure and connectivity are also, I believe, good examples of potential cross-border cooperation. Sustainable, comprehensive, and rules-based connectivity is at the heart of the EU strategy on connecting Europe and Asia. And at the EU-India summit last year, our leaders agreed to explore ways to improve connectivity between the EU and India, but also to seek synergies in their cooperation on connectivity with third countries. This could potentially be of benefit to the wider region. South Asia definitely needs better connectivity grounded on principles of openness, transparency, inclusiveness, and sustainability. Let me mention here also the digital dimension of connectivity. I think that's also relevant. It requires addressing issues such as data protection, but also security of networks. The convergence towards standards underpinned by democratic values and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms is an important task internationally, but also regionally. And while we fight COVID, we cannot forget that we are all facing climate change and biodiversity loss as existential issues. And actually, there also is a correlation. Science tells us that climate change and biodiversity loss may also have a bearing on the development of new viruses. So South Asia, I'm afraid, is particularly exposed to climate change, from the glaciers of the Himalaya to the coastal plains along the Indian Ocean. So like health emergencies, climate change knows no border. It requires consistent and cohesive efforts at global, regional, and local level. it's a potential game changer that could derail all plans. So we need to get it right and do it right now for the sake of future generations. But with these very few highlights, I think I will conclude. And thank you again for having me at this seminar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador Astuto. It was a fantastic address, and it, I think, amplified many very interesting dimensions, which I think can be cornerstones of the EU's regional interface with South Asia. I think some very important points have been raised in terms of what are the new idioms of strategic realms today as we speak about a discourse between two regions. Because as one sees it, there's no doubt that the European Union has been a valued and enduring partner of South Asia for a long time. But it's equally a fact that this particular relationship has been very narrowly defined, as you rightly talked about in terms of trade and aid. And I think this is a time right now in the 21st century when we are looking at the combination of security threats, which are statist, and also non traditional security threats, which are affecting societies, that many of these relationships need to truly become partnerships. I think there are three important dimensions in which we can situate our discussion today. The first really is the rise of the Indo-Pacific, and where does the emergence of South Asia lie within that rise of the Indo-Pacific? I think that's a very important point because the way in which we see South Asia itself is also undergoing a constant evolution and a kind of devolution. The second is, how does South Asia see itself? Because I think the days when South Asia could simply see itself as a bounded region in geopolitical terms, I think that pretty much is now seeing its utility being diminished. We are seeing South Asia, both in terms of a region and its sovereign constituents, reaching out and linkaging with other regions across the world. And in that context, the European Union, with its tremendous reservoir of finance, of skill, of technology, and of experiences in terms of institutional capacity building, becomes a very important player for South Asia. And the third point that becomes very important is how do you essentially move from trade and aid relationship that has been very enduring over the years to what we call as a three C's concept, which is a relook at how we do commerce, a relook at how we forge connectivity in all its spatial dimensions, and most importantly, how do we look at the relationship as not just a benefactor of South Asia, but as a truly compact or a truly partnership which has a mutually win-win outcomes. So I'm sure in this context, our excellent resource persons that we have today will be able to shed light on this and take this discourse forward in a very enriching manner. So thank you very much, Ambassador, once again for your address. Uh, let's now move to uh, our excellent resource persons. We'll start with Dr. Constantino Xavier, who is a fellow, and he's, of course, well known in terms of his writings and articulations, both within Europe and South Asia. He is a fellow at the Center for Social and Economic Progress, CSEP, which is a New Delhi based think tank. So let me invite Dr. Constantino to shed light on his remarks to begin with. Dr. Constantino, your 10 or 12 minutes are available to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Datish. I hope you hear me well. I joined a little late because the 0 out of 3 internet connections were working here at home. I have 2 backups, but fortunate to have 1 now working and join you. But if there's any issue, tell me, please, Datish. I'll take off the video and at least we'll try the audio. But so far, so good, unless you tell me. So thank you to IDIA and to the SADF in Brussels and in Kathmandu, these 2 organizations, for hosting this. It's a pleasure to be here today. And with you, Datish, thanks for moderating, and also the wonderful set of panelists, and of course the initial address by His Excellency Ambassador Astuto from here in Delhi, who I think gave us a really good perspective on how Brussels looks at the region holistically. You know, I think, Datish, that we have a nice balance of speakers, but I think it'll be very important for our participants to hear what's happening over there in Europe. Geography still matters. I mean, we're all here online, but I'd be very keen to hear my colleagues Stefania and Garima also enlighten us here in South Asia of what the developments are in Europe. Like you mentioned, the European thinking on the Indo-Pacific, in which South Asia fits, the European thinking on China, Is it really a systemic rival, or is it just business as usual? There's a debate going on there. The European view on the future role of the United States of America under new presidency, just inaugurated yesterday. So there's very interesting questions, I think, that are on the mind and are being discussed in Europe, which are important for us, I think, here in South Asia to hear. So I'll just say three things that I think each of these actors should not do. And let me just emphasize why I thought of doing this here today, because I think we have often overloaded expectations on what the European Union can deliver. In India, we often hear strategists and analysts saying we want the EU to be a more important security and military actor. Where are the EU frigates? We can see French frigates in the Indian Ocean. So there's tremendous expectations on this new actor called the European Union, which is not equal to any of the member states. This is a different political entity called the European Union. And at the same time, I think in Europe, vice versa, there have often been some misperceptions and excessive sort of misperceptions about this region and India's role in it, the neighboring countries, Chinese role in this region. So I want to say two, three things for each side that I think each actor, the European Union and South Asian countries, so basically India, but also Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and I do include Myanmar, or Burma as it is known still in some parts of the world. I think if we look at those two actors, sort of those two sets of actors, South Asia and the European Union, there are a few things that I would caution against. And sometimes it's better to sort of not do certain things than doing too much and then being disappointed or creating tensions. Let me start with the EU. What I think may not be the best road to follow. One issue I would advise against, and that may come up, I don't know, let's see what happens, is a return to the old interventionist, normative, democratic agenda of the 2000s. This was anchored in principles like the responsibility to protect, R2P at the United Nations, where several European countries, but also the EU collectively pushed hard in Nepal, pushed hard in Sri Lanka, pushed hard in Myanmar, pushed hard against India to be more vocal about these issues. So I think that's certainly one thing that, especially now, there are question marks about what the route will be under President Biden in American foreign policy. We know that Europe and the US have often collaborated on this agenda in the 2000s. So I would certainly say that this is something that may create tensions in the EU's relationship and image across the subcontinent and this region. That's number one. At the same time, and this is a thin line, this is one extreme, the interventionist human rights agenda, sanctions, military intervention obviously haven't happened in this region in that sense, but in other parts of the world, let's not forget Libya, Syria, etc. So there will be a lot of pushback there. At the same time, what also not to do on the other extreme, this is two extremes, I would caution against the European Union voices that sometimes sort of push for a very neutralist approach, a very technical business-only approach. Let's do trade agreements. You see it in some few voices that actually try to explain and legitimize any trade agreement, or investments agreement with China most recently. You see it sometimes even in the area of development assistance and cooperation. We just do simple irrigation projects or electricity projects or road building, and we don't get into the business of politics norms. So you have the two extremes, right? This is the second extreme on the other hand, that you sort of just a neutral actor that will just do business or technical cooperation and will stay away from this sort of strategic normative agenda that the Americans or the Indians or the Japanese are pushing. And that is, I think, concerning because, first of all, it's a myth. I think the European Union certainly knows that in its past decades, everything and anything it has done, the most technical cooperation always is embedded in a political context, whether it's in Africa, whether it is in the Indian Ocean region, whether it is in Latin America. There's always been to any aspect, a normative political impetus for what the European Union does. A democratic impetus, if you want to spell it out, a normative impetus about multilateralism, regional cooperation, like the ambassador just mentioned. These are values that are integral to the European Union, and they naturally get transmitted in the way the European Union has engaged, recommended, funded initiatives worldwide. But at the same time, I think there is often a certain anxiety of the European Union to spell this out, to bring this out. So this is the second thing I'd caution against. The last thing I would caution against to the European Union in this region in South Asia is to work alone. The European Union is already a collection, obviously, of several political entities. So it is a single political entity in some ways, but it's a weird animal in the political system. But it is difficult, of course, to get all these voices together of the member states for the EU to operate collectively or respond in one voice to many different regional issues here in South Asia, whether it is India, Pakistan, whether it is India's approach to the Indo-Pacific, whether it is the future of the constitutional stability in Nepal, whether it is the democratic transition in Myanmar, whether it is reconciliation and transitional justice in Sri Lanka, whether it is the Maldives and maritime security and the importance of the Indian Ocean region. There are several challenges, obviously, to speak in one voice and certainly operate in one voice. But beyond that, I think at some point there are certain areas where the EU can, should, and must coordinate its action with other actors in this region. That means not only in EU-Nepal relations, for example, which is a strong and good relationship that has been expanding, for example, with the European Union having its own diplomatic mission in Kathmandu, supporting tremendously, for example, in Nepal, the developmental process, the new political institutions that are coming up, the governance sector, etc. But beyond that, I would welcome more of a coordination with other actors. And certainly India, which is a leading actor in this region in terms of the power concentration, but also other countries like Japan, for example, that are playing a very important role in terms of infrastructure and connectivity, like we heard the ambassador mention, is one of the priority in this region for the European Union. The United States, why not China in some ways, see what they're up to. So often I'm concerned the European Union sticks a bit too much to its own, is a firm believer in its own advantages, which certainly has, but it more communication channel with other actors, I think, would be welcome, and therefore working alone isolation is something that should be avoided. I'll just end on the South Asian side with two things that I think that similarly here in this region, countries need to be careful about. One is a mirror to what I said about the European Union is, I see often a temptation in some South Asian countries, not India now, all others I mentioned, to push the EU out or to give the EU a hard time because it's so much easier to deal with the Chinese that deliver quickly, they don't have strings attached, with India that is next door and is just pragmatic on certain things. And the EU comes with complex systems, with norms, like I mentioned before. I would caution against that because from my reading of international politics, it is in the interest of any of these countries, Nepal, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, Bangladesh, etc., to have the widest range of diverse actors and not get stuck in an India-China or competition or an India-China-US triangle competition. The more options these countries have, the better. It'll give them more bargaining power. It'll give them more capabilities. It'll allow them to explore the comparative advantage each of these actors brings to their developmental imperatives, to infrastructure financing, to capacity building. So I think the European Union here certainly needs to be brought in more than pushed out. And I say pushed out because I've heard many voices saying the Europeans, are just not used, we don't need them anymore, they've done all this and the European Union is a complex entity and we just prefer to work with these other actors. And I'll end on this, one last sort of note related to this is therefore, so while you need to have a wide range of actors, there are certain things that the EU brings to the table that are different from other actors. We saw the ambassador mention the importance of multilateralism and regional cooperation and institutionalized cooperation, not just bilateral cooperation. And here, I think there is a tremendous potential for these countries to engage the European Union at the level that goes beyond just a simple other bilateral relationship. Let me give again the example of Nepal, since we're being co-hosted by a Nepali institution in this region. I don't see it of the advantage of Nepal to look at the EU as just another actor, similar to Japan, the US, China, and India. The EU has a specific comparative advantage, a political history, technical resources, clear thinking about the future of global governance and multilateralism, and within that, regional institutions and regional cooperation. So whether it's SAARC, whether it's BIMSTEC, whether it's trilateral engagements, I think there's a tremendous agenda there for these countries to engage with. Thank you, Datish.
Yeah, thank you, Constantino. I think that was a fascinating presentation. If I may just kind of, add a few comments to it. I think you made three very important points about the European Union perception in the region. One is about basically it being seen as basically over-promising and probably under-delivering because a lot of expectations exist from the European Union. You also talked of probably a comparatively technical approach, which is value neutral, where you basically do your stuff and get out of there. But I'm, just trying a very interesting point here that at this time, the understanding of some of the capacity building projects that the European Union has been doing in the region is also undergoing a kind of a retooling or a re-understanding. Because I think we are moving away from the conventional form of capacity building projects to what we now understand as quote unquote strategic capacitation. And in the context of a rising China and the kind of options that China is providing, of course, expedient options to South Asia, the whole idea of how the Western world and the democratic world understands strategic capacitation of lesser developed countries is, I think, going to be key in this race between China and the rest in being able to provide the right kind of strategic options to these countries. I think you made a very good point about the European Union not going it alone. Even though it's a very unique actor, it brings many unique assets to the table, but it's important to basically band along. And in this, I think it will be important to see what President Biden does with what Trump announced with the Blue Dot Network. I mean, in terms of technical standards, strategic infrastructure in this wider South Asian and the Indo-Pacific region, whether the European Union sees itself as a potential partner of that network or uses that network to be able to float its own kind of projects in the region. So, and lastly about China, I think basically what we are facing, if I had to put it in one phrase, it's transactionalism sans trust. I think the point is what China is providing to the lesser developed countries of South Asia is clearly expedient cooperation. As you rightly said, expeditious cooperation, things which work on the ground, things which are tangible in terms of their outlook, but then they are obviously driven not from a point of view of strategic trust. So where the European Union becomes a unique actor, not just in its own self, but for others in the region, is the tremendous sense of trust that one can have in the kind of projects that the European Union would be floating. So thank you very much, Constantino, and we'll come back for Q&A. Let me now invite Dr. Mathew. Dr. Mathew is a research analyst at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi. And he will be speaking for the next 10, 12 minutes or so on convergences and divergences in the EU's economic outlook towards South Asia. So Dr. Mathew, your 12 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. In fact, may I just admit that I'm among stalwarts on researchers who have worked on India-European Union. And I have always been looking up to their readings, especially, when we are working on European Union and India, it's always, we get limited information. And especially when we are sitting here in Delhi as such. But then at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, IDIA, Kathmandu, and South Asian Democratic Forum, SADF, Brussels, for giving me this opportunity to speak on convergences and divergences in EU's economic outlook towards South Asia. I'm a doctorate in political science, but I have just taken today the liberty of just flexing out my economic skills, if any, I have, in understanding what is the EU's economic outlook towards South Asia, and what are the pluses and minuses, or where can we converge, where can EU converge with South Asia, and where EU can diverge, where we don't agree with, where South Asia doesn't agree with EU's play. So I'll just, I'll just structure my presentation. But before I do that, I will just say that the views expressed here are solely mine. It does not represent my institute or the government of India. So this is how I shall structure my presentation. I shall initially look at the European Union's economic strategy in South Asia. And by looking at that, I look at what are the basic trade instruments that European Union have been using in South Asia. What are the ways by which Europe and Asia are connecting together? And then I will veer my talk towards understanding India's strategic partnership in economic terms with the European Union, and finally the convergences and divergences in European Union strategy in South Asia and the way forward. To begin with, if you have to understand EU strategy in South Asia, we have to, it's a given to us that European Union is the largest trading partner of South Asia. European Union as a regional bloc is also a major development and aid donor to the countries of South Asia. As being quoted by my panelist in her writing, indeed, South Asia is a pivotal region for the world. Its 8 countries constitute roughly 25% of the world population. The total volume of South Asia's GDP is amounting to $3,453 trillion, with an average growth of about 5%. So we have the economics of South Asia on one hand, but we also have to know what are the social ills and economic ills. Basically, poverty is an issue, but then it has been steadily declining since its peak in 2002. But still, South Asia is ranked as the second poorest region in the world, and overpopulation continues to represent a big challenge for the region, which is among the most densely populated areas on the globe. So this is by way of just looking at South Asia and looking at its economics. On a very brief, I'm trying to cover that. We have to understand that EU stepped into South Asia by gaining an observer status in South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation in 2006, in the belief that the SAARC can play a useful role in regional cooperation and dialogue, and that EU could help consolidate the ongoing integration process through its economic influence in the region, its own historical experience of economic and trade integration, and of dealing with diversity, and its interest in crisis prevention. Now, at the outset, I would like to just make a comment, just make an observation that EU and South Asia are 2 things apart, and we cannot emulate from the European economic model of integration, because each brings in a lot to the table as such. Each has its own specificities, each comes from different areas. So it's not easy to do that. But then, having said that, what are the trade instruments that European Union have been pursuing in South Asia? But we should understand the European Union as a bloc is being governed by a country-specific approach, and it is basically to bilateral agreements. So we have in the form of 5 basic tools on the economic part of it. The first is partnership and cooperation agreement. Now, what does it entail? It provides a general framework for bilateral economic relations, but do not entail tariff removal or reduction, that is non-preferential trade agreements. And PCA, that is Partnership Cooperation Agreement, is in effect in Sri Lanka 1995, Bangladesh 2001, and Pakistan 2004. Then we have the bilateral free trade agreement. Now that is something I can relate to, because India was in negotiations with the European Union since 2007 on a bilateral free trade agreement. There have been talks about it. It has been the 13th round, the 14th round, and they have not come to a common understanding of how to conclude the agreement on, because they have certain differences. Because I recall an ambassador once saying in Rajya Sabha TV that they were very close in clinching the deal, but just because the tariff on issues of automotives, on wines, that was the factor that basically led to a standstill. So what does an FTA, what does it include? An FTA enables reciprocal market opening with developed countries and emerging economies by granting preferential access to markets through bilateral removal or reduction of custom tariffs. The India-EU FTA negotiations, as I've mentioned, that has started since 2007, is a case in point. The third instrument is the standard GSP. This standard GSP targets low and lower middle income countries and grant full or partial duty reductions for 2/3 of all EU tariff lines for beneficiaries that do not enjoy other preferential trade agreements with the EU in order to facilitate the access of their exports to the European market. As of January 2019, we have India is the only South Asian country to benefit from the standard GSP scheme. Now we have a GSP plus scheme, that is the fourth instrument of EU in terms of its trade to South Asia. GSP scheme is reserved to vulnerable, low and lower middle income countries and ensures the full removal of tariffs on 2/3 of all EU tariff lines, conditioned upon the ratification and implementation of 27 core international conventions relating to human rights, labor rights, protection of the environment, and good governance. Failure to comply the same may entail temporary or full withdrawal of preferences. And the countries are under the GSP plus scheme is Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So this is the GSP plus scheme, it is tied with certain conditionalities. And the last instrument is everything but arms regime. It's called the EBA, which is offered to least developed countries and entails a duty-free, quota-free access to the European market for all products except arms and ammunition. And as of January 2019, we have countries in South Asia that are availing this scheme, this regime that includes Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. So this is broadly the 5 economic trade instruments that European Union has. And it has been following these programs in South Asia. Now, I'm looking at South Asia. I'm looking at how is the South Asia trade with European Union. So if you look, the first partners, the trade partners would be invariably, if you look at the data as per 2018 of the European Commission and the World Bank, they say India, Bangladesh, and they say Pakistan, are the countries that we have better, exports and imports to EU. But then I would like to say is that the European Union has always maintained an individualized approach towards South Asian countries. This is a point I would like to harp on later on, is that there is not a unified approach. Because if you see, there has been a communication from the European Commission. There have been a document which was basically how to connect with, that will come later. There is no clear specific strategy on South Asia, because I just picked up that document. I just did Control F and I said South Asia. There's no mention of South Asia. It's India and passing. So it becomes, and there's Southeast Asia. So sometimes we get a feeling that there is more importance given to ASEAN countries or Mercosur or so. So this becomes a point that I would like to take on further. So So, but then, as I've said earlier in the beginning, is that there is no point in comparing different economic models of economic integration. See, I mean, say EU and ASEAN have different economic models, or EU and SAARC, there has been a lot of literature doing that, but I find that there's no point, and I find that each member of a regional grouping should play to its strengths and weaknesses. India should play to its strengths. What is its strengths in its trade, in goods and services, and so forth. So, and for that, I would say that, if we require to build up our trade, fundamentally, it is important to develop requisite economic systems. And these systems is only happen, as been mentioned by the ambassador, if they are better infrastructural facilities, and if we can enhance our connectivities in these areas. And that has been clearly mentioned in the EU strategy document 2018, Connecting Europe and Asia, Building Blocks for an EU Strategy. Herein, EU views Asia as a whole, remember Asia as a whole, on building efficient and sustainable connectivity. EU acknowledges that there is a significant investment gap that exists in connectivity, and it is an opportunity for European Union to deliver mutually beneficial assistance. So connectivity is the key word if we go through that document, because they say if we connect, then things can work out fine. So connectivity as European way is the major takeaway for South Asia in terms of ideating, formulating a strategy, but not necessarily emulating it. So what is this European way that has been outlined in the document? This European way of connectivity is based on three premises. First, it is an emphasis that is placed on economic, fiscal, environmental, and social sustainability of projects. The second, it's a comprehensive view of connectivity, including transport links, digital networks, energy flows, as well as a crucial human dimension. And the third is adherence to and promotion of international rules and regulations to create a level playing field. So by these three premises, we can understand that, as been mentioned by the ambassador, is that when we're talking about when we're talking, it has to be comprehensible, sustainable, and rules-based. So that is what European Union has, having a strategy that they have mentioned for Asia. Now I come to India. What is the strategic partnership with European Union in economic terms? Because I know we have capable and panelists who can do on the political, as what Dr. Constantino has earlier talked about with regard to Indo-Pacific and the China factor. So I would like to look at the economics of it. Now the economics is readily available, but I will just for matter of introduction, is that the EU is India's largest trading partner that accounts for 80 billion euros worth of trade in goods in 2019, with a surplus of around 2 billion euros in India's favor. European Union is also one of India's most important sources of investment. The EU foreign direct investment in India amounts to 68 billion euros in 2018. India currently benefits from the unilateral preferential tariffs under the EU generalized scheme of preferences that I have mentioned in the trading instrument that is used by European Union, which links unilateral trade preferences to respect for human and labor rights. Now, we have been aware that there was a virtual summit that was conducted in July 2020 between India and European Union, where we adopted a joint declaration to move towards a circular economic model that provides for reduction in primary resource consumption and enhancing the use of secondary raw materials. And also, we also was considering, given the COVID-19, we should always turn a crisis into an opportunity. So it was a resolve to further expand bilateral economic engagement. Recognizing the post-COVID-19 recovery priorities offers opportunities to unleash full potential for trade and investment ties. And it was acknowledged that EU is an important source for technology, innovation, and best practices for India. And as been earlier mentioned, since the trade negotiations were halted for some point of time, it was realized that we have to resume it by constituting a high-level working dialogue team to remove the trade irritants and improve the conditions for traders and investors on both sides, as well as discuss supply chain linkages. So it is also important here at this point of time that we should also bolster the local and global supply exchanges, linkages. That is very important, that that what the present government is trying to do to its Atmanirbhar package, where it is trying to be self-reliant. And this is one thing that we would have to play. Each country has to develop its own potentiality or develop its own strength on a particular product, and thereafter we are able to export it with due help, and we are able to then build bridges with other countries of the world. So I come to now basically what are the convergences and divergences before I end my talk. If we talk about convergences, where can EU and South Asia meet? When I was doing my PhD, I was thinking European Union gives technology to us. It gives us high-tech equipment. It gives us heavy machinery. And what do we give them? We give them raw materials. But then if you can combine both of them, but then what we have understood in the recent statements in European Union and South Asia is that we can work together towards functional areas. What could those be? It could be in greening technologies, enhancing digital, energy, and also people-to-people connectivity. Digital connectivity is of immense importance in the times we're living in. We can learn what is the data privacy law that is coming from European Union in the formulation of our privacy laws. So, and also in terms of connectivities, be it air transport, surface transport, road transport, air transport, the decarbonization of the air transport, and then there are certain avenues by which we can learn how EU have been implementing their practices. Some may be failed, but some may be successful practices. So those practices can be imbibed, but it's not necessarily we have to emulate it. That is a word of caution. And also COVID-19, as I've earlier said, is a crisis, but that crisis can be turned into an opportunity for regional groupings to come together and sub-regional groupings. So SAARC may be a non-starter, but the sub-regional groups like BBIN, like BIMSTEC, provides an opportunity for, in a crisis, to people and regional groupings to come together and work towards fighting the COVID-19. So these are areas where they can converge at regional levels. Now, divergences, there are many, but what comes in front of my mind is the protectionist tendencies among the South Asian countries, and vice versa with the European Union, and also the tariff barrier issue. These act as a hindrance towards facilitating trade, within South Asia and also externally with the other countries of the world. The second point I was further thinking is that, as said, SAARC is internally divided. It is divided, but then that's beauty because we have different points of view. Each sovereignty is respected. But South Asia, that is the case in South Asia. So what happens is that in European Union, everything falls in line. Everything is being regulated. And this is another point also we can understand is that we should also, as been mentioned, has been written by the panelists also, we should also understand the regulatory frameworks of European Union. How are they working it out? And is there a lesson that we can learn from them? So these are certain things that we have to do. But then there are certain issues of democracy promotion, human rights, rule of law. Now, in South Asia, when we listen to it, it feels like someone is lecturing to us or hectoring to us. But that is not the case because they do believe in that principle. It is based on those democratic principles. That is the reason why that institution is standing. So I would like to say is that the European Union should recognize that democracy building can best come from within rather than being imposed from outside, and should therefore become a supportive facilitator of democracy building and human rights in a non-intrusive manner, allowing South Asia to find its own answers that are consistent with the ethos of the region. So, moreover, there is a need for EU to adopt a more unified approach towards South Asia as opposed to relations with individual countries in order to improve external policy coherence and effectively counter negative trends. In conclusion, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, they all look towards European Union as a valuable market for their export products. In addition, the Union is among the partners for social development. It has been encouraging a lot of developmental assistance on various welfare projects across South Asia, and that has to be further encouraged. The economic potentialities of European Union in South
Mathew,
Asia. Yeah, I'm just giving one line.
I think we need to conclude now because there are two other presenters as well. So I think you had a very
I'm just completing
appraisal.
I'm just completing in one line.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the economic potentialities of European Union in South Asia can be best utilized on a functional basis by cooperating on building infrastructural capacities and initiating dialogues on varied forms of connectivity so as to facilitate trade between and within the respective regions. Thank you, sir. I sorry to take your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mathew. It was a comprehensive appraisal of the economic outlook between South Asia and European Union. I will not summarize that. I'll leave it for the Q&A session. The next speaker is going to be Ms. Stefania Benaglia, who is an associate researcher from the Center for European Policy Studies in Belgium. So may I invite Ms. Stefania to kindly make her presentation.
Thank you very much and good morning. I actually would like to start asking, I'm actually curious how many of you remember how the EU and India strategic partnership was described as not living up to its potential or being somehow less valuable than bilateral relations with member states, right? But I'm actually very happy to see that finally we've left this phase behind us and we are now in a new phase where there is a political capital and a strong belief of policymakers that see the value of this strategic partnership. In my remarks today, I will first take stock of where we are at with the EU-India strategic partnership. Then I will look at the direction where the relations are going. And finally, I will cover a few selected areas of where the work still needs to be done. So where are we with the EU-India strategic partnership? If we compare the roadmap to 2025, the document which was agreed in the last summit in July, with the Agenda for Action 2020, is the previous one adopted in 2016, we immediately realized that the partnership has been evolving and expanding both in breadth and in width. The roadmap is a rich and detailed document with a lot that really moves the bar higher, with an agenda that, while the previous document was rather a stock-taking exercise, identifying a few areas where they could cooperate. And in the meantime, we have the EU strategy for India that was adopted, and the major point of it was to streamline the member states' approach towards India and really refining the notion that consistent and coordinated foreign policy with India is to the benefit of all, on top of bilateral relations. So much so that we finally see the EU-India summit, which is scheduled for next May in Porto, which has been indicated as the main deliverable of the Portuguese presidency. This is important because this makes the step that the notion that EU-India relations are a top political priority for the EU. It's really the political message that comes with it is kind of a newity, because it's the first time that such a gravity comes with it. And so why this shift happened? I believe that, of course, it happened because they both grew as global actors, but I'm also siding with those that say that last year obviously accelerated this shift because it made all of us realize the importance of diversifying the global supply chain away from China, and of course, the shift to the Indo-Pacific as global geopolitical center of gravity. Now, indeed, if we place the EU-India relations against this background, we see that this relationship is not only important because of all the potential that it embeds, but it's even more important because of the geopolitical context in which it sits. Now, if we look a little bit deeper in the roadmap 2025, we see that on top of agreeing on the importance on joining efforts in fighting climate change, which is obviously the most important challenge of all, the two priorities where the political capital is invested are the reopening of the FTA negotiations and the reinforcing of the foreign policy and security cooperation, especially in the maritime security dialogue. The choice of those priorities signal that the leaders are really ready to put in the political investment in the partnership, which has been the element that has been lacking so far. The EU is growing in its role as global political actor and is learning how to leverage its economic power. And it's really, we are now seeing this shift happening. And while we're still at the beginning of this shift, but we see elements which are consistent with it and are actually piling up at a much higher speed than before. So I actually think that the EU as a political actor will come into play much sooner than what we would have anticipated without the acceleration happening in 2020. So now we move at where the relations are going, indeed. So if we first look at the geoeconomics in the Indo-Pacific region, we see that there's a lot of dynamism there. In 2018, the EU signed an FTA with Japan and with Singapore, in 2019 with Vietnam, and in 2020, the investment agreement with China. Is also negotiating trade deals with ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand. Of course, the next in line is India, also because the trade deal with India would unlock the whole potential of the strategic partnership. Indeed, I will here make a little parenthesis. If we assume that today the negotiation on a trade deal would reopen, both actors would find themselves in a completely different context than when they left them in 2013, not only because they are completely different economies, but because of the political weight and political incentive in coming through a trade deal is completely different than what it was in 2013, when it was indeed a much more economic exercise. Today, would we reopen and do this exercise, there would be the whole political dimension that comes along with a trade deal that would weight much more even on the economic dimension. We had a recent study that actually proved exactly this. There was the whole calculation of how much they would gain from a trade deal, and the conclusion of the study done by the European Parliament said indeed that the externalities are so much bigger than the actual numbers on the trade deal, but they are obviously much more difficult to calculate. So indeed, the first deliverable that I really expect to see sometime soon would be the reopening of the negotiations, and hopefully, obviously, the adoption of some sort of trade deal. I leave it open here to see what the trade deal would be. Also because, of course, we need to factor in that there would need to be a dramatic change of Indian trade policy, and I don't know how that would fit in. But I, again, want to stress the point that political context and the political incentive in signing a trade deal are today much stronger. And of course, we need to see also in this a little parenthesis on how India will play with the UK, because the UK left the EU saying that the trade deal with India was pretty much a done deal. So of course, the EU is looking at how this negotiation will go. The second deliverable that I like to see is cooperation on connectivity. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this particularly because that has been said much about it. I simply say that I share the importance of it. And I simply want to make the point that I think they should invest into having joint initiatives, concrete initiatives, to prove that strategic partnership is capable of making an impact, and therefore gaining credibility as global actors, both of them. And this should be done with concrete initiatives and not only providing soft connectivity, which is, if you want, the first thing that is immediately referred to, also because there is an added value there. But really investing into full-fledged connectivity projects that give visibility to both partners. And also, in particular, amongst the three areas of connectivity, the infrastructure, the energy, and the digital, I would simply now say a few words on the digital connectivity, because here we really have an opportunity, if with, of course, India that brings in the scale and Europe that brings in a mature market already regulated with the GDPR, if they manage to establish a dialogue on digital norms for setting global standards or platform regulation and fairness, it would really be a game changer globally. And with this, I quote the HRVP, who during a discussion at the European Parliament 2 days ago, he said, we must show rather than just tell. Again, exactly what I was making as a point. It is important to strengthen the concept of togetherness in these projects and not only of cooperation. And now let's look at what still needs to be done. What are the areas that need further work for EU-India cooperation? First of all, multilateralism. And in this, practically, I would point my finger at aligning the voting patterns in multilateral settings. If we analyze the voting patterns of the two entities, when they actually get down to voting, we see that they vote alike less than 50% of the time. It's pretty much the same alignment that the EU has with Ethiopia, to give it another example. So this brings a conceptual problem, because while you share the same values, when it matters to vote, you actually express different divergent visions. So here there is the need to do a work on fine-tuning the actions and working together towards common goals. Second, obviously, the common goal would also be, for example, strengthening the rule of law-based multilateralism, and therefore reforming the international forum that, these reforms that we've all been talking about for many years. And so a joint work into this, joint work into common goals would really make a difference. Also, cooperation on multilateral formats. I actually believe that one strength of the EU is obviously to bring on to the table the capacity it acquired with time, with difficulties of finding an agreement. And so the whole cooperation with multilateral formats, for example, the Quad, which is something where I suspect there will be more information coming by Dr. Mohan. If she's not commenting, I would be happy to comment on it during the Q&A. That could be an interesting point. And also, we need to see what will be, in the Indo-Pacific strategy. That will be, so of course, after France and Germany and the Netherlands, we actually expect the EU to be drafting an Indo-Pacific strategy. That will be a very interesting exercise for a number of reasons. Again, I'm not going to comment too much on it. But one point is that it will be a very interesting occasion for member states to further fine-tune their position vis-a-vis China, because of course that will be the chance to put all the different points of view and approaches together, make a coherentness, and that is where you actually go into more further detail. So this is going to be another level of further fine-tuning that will again bring another level of maturity as global actor, global political actor, and again fine-tune its position vis-a-vis China. And in conclusion, I only want to make two remarks to the call for comments that was done by Dr. Xavier at the beginning. Regarding the relations with the USA, I think that, yes, of course, we do have now a new president. The outlook is absolutely more positive. We all look into constructive cooperation. But I think the 4 years of Trump really made a before and an after. There is the relations with the EU, with the USA, I think will not be, the EU will no longer overwhelmingly rely on the USA as it used to be. There is a maturation that came with it. Of course, we all want to have a close coordination and cooperation as much as possible, but we grew beyond the overwhelmingly reliance on the USA. And another point I wanted to make is how SAARC countries should deal with the EU. And here I would actually see a great opportunity given by Brexit, because all the countries that used to have, that still have a strong relations and a link with the UK, I had the impression, especially looking at how the dynamics were coming in the European Parliament, that a great deal was actually given to the UK to kind of advocate for them within the EU. Because they, of course, the UK was the country with whom they were more at ease in a way, because they had closer links, etc., even if the past was a big one. But now with the UK out of the picture, there is actually a big opportunity. And I stress the importance of using this opportunity, of creating new narratives as well, because of course we now have a new narrative that can be created inside the European Parliament on how the EU relates with SAARC countries. And with this, I would like to conclude by thanking the organizers of the summit for inviting me to share my thoughts. And thank you very much. Happy to reply more on the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Stefani. I think that was very succinct and very comprehensive yet. I think you made some very, very important points about how the European Union must be able to leverage its strategic clout to be able to become a more pervasive and more ubiquitous political actor in the region. You also talked very interestingly about how the European Union now needs to focus on a free trade deal with India on the back of its other trade deals that it's done with Asian partners. And you hope that an FTA would happen quicker rather than later. But we also have to keep this in mind that this is really the elephant in the room. India also doesn't have a very good track record in terms of being able to conclude FTAs. And even cooperation agreements that India has right now with traditional partners like Japan and South Korea, India seems to be having a rethink, because the feeling is India hasn't got much out of it as yet. You've also seen how India has reacted to RCEP and how the other countries in RCEP essentially saw India as being something like a spoiler because of the infirmities in India's manufacturing. So given our own experiences, even not being able to do much with Australia on the FTA, I think it will be something that will be on the slow burner for some time. I think you made a very important point about digital infrastructure cooperation prioritized over energy and other areas, given that it's a mutual fit. And you also spoke very eloquently about how India and European Union need to have better convergence at multilateral platforms in being able to make it a kind of systemic collaboration in terms of politico-diplomatic approaches. So thank you very much for your presentation. Last but by no means the least, I will now invite Dr. Garima Mohan, who of course is a fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Berlin. So may I invite Dr. Garima to make her presentation.
Thank you, Datesh. I hope you can hear me. Yeah.
Yes.
I will keep my remarks short with a look towards the time, and we also have a few questions. I think Constantino and Stefania covered most of the points quite well. I'll use my status as an Indian based in Europe to make three main points. First is to show the change in perceptions in Europe towards India, as well as South Asia and the Indo-Pacific. Second, to cover why is there this change in perception and tone. And third, I would like to cover a little bit the debate around the Indo-Pacific that is going on in Europe right now and the opportunities that it presents for countries in South Asia, but particularly India, to recalibrate and realign its partnership with the EU. So let me start with the perception. So Datesh, even you, when you opened the panel, you said that the EU and India, or the EU's relationship with South Asia, is mostly trade and aid. But I have to say that a lot has changed in this formulation. When I first started working on this almost a decade ago, I think this was true then. But since then, really, India has moved from the periphery to the center of how European Union looks at its key strategic partnerships around the world. India is one of the major partners. And the reason for this is, firstly, the European Union has come into its own as a foreign policy actor. And the more it has had to grapple with geopolitics, it's understood that it can't look at partners simply through the prism of development aid or trade. Everything has a strategic overlay as well. Second is a recognition in Europe that the global strategic center of gravity has shifted from the Atlantic towards the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. The European Union has deep trade relationships with dynamic economies of the Indo-Pacific. For most European member states, it's the second most important export destination outside of Europe. So there is an understanding that Europe's security and prosperity is deeply entangled with the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific. And third, the reason for this shift is really the troubles in the transatlantic partnership. With the Trump administration, one of the partnerships that suffered greatly was the US-Europe partnership. And as Stefania mentioned, these differences will certainly not be forgotten in the new Biden administration. Europe also realizes that the US will continue to ask more of Europe in terms of burden sharing, in terms of dealing with the rise of China. And in many ways, Europe will have to find its own independent foreign policy as well, and try to work with middle players across the world. Because traditional international institutions are not delivering, the transatlantic partnership has not really delivered, and therefore there is even more incentive within the European Union to work with partners like India, like Australia, like Japan, the ASEAN, etc. So while I have to say that the EU is constantly downplayed in Delhi, this change towards looking at India as an important player, looking at India as an important pillar in maintaining a multipolar Indo-Pacific, this change has really been driven by Brussels and Paris. So we really have to think and appreciate that the European Union has also, in a way, reframed how Europeans talk about India. And the most important signal of this is the EU strategy for India that was released, if I'm not wrong, at the end of 2018. It's a document that I would encourage all of you to read. It's very enlightening. Even though it is an internal document determining the scope of how European Union and its member states should work with India, it really shows how much of a broad spectrum the EU is aiming at, how much it wants to elevate its partnership with India. And so much of it is on security and foreign policy, but also the role of the two in maintaining, sort of maneuvering between US-China competition and maintaining multipolarity. So I think this is an important shift in perceptions in the EU. Why has this change of tone taken place? Again, as I mentioned, several documents in Europe say the dynamics in Asia will have a direct impact on security and prosperity of the European Union. This was most clear with the COVID crisis, which showed not only the whole tenuousness around supply chains when Europe did not have enough pharma, masks, etc., available to deal with this, but also how quickly something that happened in Asia traveled to Europe and impacted what was going on in Europe. It's very encouraging to see more attention in Europe regarding the China-India boundary clashes, where Europe is also looking at that and understanding China's behavior as an international actor. In many ways, Indo-Pacific is a canary in the coal mines. And all of these challenges that we are facing today, Europe will face tomorrow. This is why we saw after France, Germany, and the Netherlands come up with their own Indo-Pacific strategies. Now the EU itself is considering very seriously to have its own Indo-Pacific strategy, which would not just mean a change in nomenclature from Asia to Indo-Pacific, but really a change in priorities and how it deals with the region. And here I think the Indian Ocean will be an important area where we can think of working, India and the EU working together. As I said, expectations from the US to burden share from Europe will not decrease. So Indian Ocean would be, in my opinion, a key area. The second is connectivity. It has been mentioned many times. Constantino was saying that the EU shouldn't just look at these sort of investments as sort of technical capacity building. And that is absolutely right. The EU has shifted. The whole point of a connectivity strategy was to say these investments are strategic. They will have an impact on security and the balance of power. So who do you work with? And Datesh, you mentioned the Blue Dot Network. I'm quite confident that given the importance of Indo-Pacific under Biden, we've seen in the new appointees, this will certainly be a topic of discussion with the EU, but also after signing the connectivity partnership with Japan, it's important that why did Europe choose the first partner was Japan? Given Japan's long history of investments in connectivity in the Indo-Pacific, this was really important. India has also reached out to Europe. Australia has also reached out to Europe. Let's work together. And here the partnership is really of equals. This whole question, I often see the perceptions in India, particularly of the public. At the official level, they have understood how to work with the EU, and really official level exchanges have gone really, really high. The visits by our EAM on various forums in Europe, by the Prime Minister, consultations at the policy planning level, they're really solid. But still at the public level, the perception is Europe is lecturing us, Europe is talking about just rules and norms, and these don't match with us. And I think the actual cooperation has gone way ahead. We have already circumvented these debates. I would say that the officials in India who are dealing with Europeans would not complain that they are being lectured, etc. I think these are debates of a bygone era. And really in India, what we need to think about, and I'll conclude with this, is where does Europe figure in our strategic imagination? When we look at our partnerships in the world, why are we investing in Europe? What do we want from this partnership? If we want to sort of shore up capacities to deal with the China challenge, where do we see Europe coming in? Do we see it as sort of reshoring our domestic capacities, on trade, on the question of Chinese influence in international institutions, on the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific? I think we really need, it's also a moment of introspection for us here in South Asia. Where do we see the role for the EU? Where do we want to work with them? And where are its limitations as an actor, where we would rather work with individual member states or the US or our other Quad partners? So I really think that at this point, we need to reshape the debate. We need to move beyond this sort of, we're being lectured and this is a unequal partnership, etc., to really think about what do we want from Europe? Where can we deliver? As you mentioned, the FTA is going to be a difficult sell. Maybe we can look at investment agreements. Post-COVID economic recovery, we'll really have to think about, the whole question of supply chains. So I think it is time that, given how the world has shifted on its fulcrum, we must also shift how we approach the European Union. Thanks, and I'll stop with that.
Yeah, thank you, Garima. I think two very important points that came out from your presentation. One was clarifying some of the reframing of European perception of India, the Indo-Pacific, and the larger calculus. But also, I think very important was about your, showing up the disconnect between how we are working at the political level and how the same thing is not being adequately appreciated at the people-to-people level. And I think basically when we look at, public perception in India also, I think about Europe, it kind of straddles two extremes. So on the one hand, when you had the Indo-Pacific policy being announced by France, Germany, Netherlands, etc., there was a certain degree of skepticism that what does it really mean? How far Europe can really be relevant in the Indo-Pacific? Beyond France, what does Europe really have to offer? And on the other hand, now we are also, the moment the investment deal was done by Europe with China, there has been a lot of negativity talking about, look, we have always been suspecting the Europeans, they're just being expedient, they're cutting deals with whoever they can. So I think somewhere the truth obviously lies in between the two, and there needs to be better engagement at the people-to-people level, at the community level, at the stakeholder level, which needs to then feed into policy. So thank you very much, Garima. I think it was an excellent presentation. I think let's now open the floor for Q&A. There are already 3 questions. I believe a couple of them for Constantino. Can you see them, Constantino?
Or yes, I've seen them, Datish, but in the interest of time, geographic and gender balance, if you don't mind, shall we start reversely? Maybe you can, the speakers, we can start with Garima and go backwards, and I'll try to just 2 minutes address it.
So basically, there's a question for Stefania. So if Stefania would like to answer that, about the strategic autonomy and the European Union in the context of Biden administration?
Yes, I actually think, as I was saying, 4 years of Trump started a process which is not reversible. And I would actually say that it was not only 4 years of Trump, but it was also the Brexit that actually allowed the EU to walk a much faster pace when it comes to union and the cooperation on the defense domain. And we see now a proliferation of important initiatives. I'm thinking, of course, of the PESCO and the European Defence Fund, which have been established to stimulate the internal defense capability building, but also initiatives such as the strategic compass. And all of these are initiatives which will not be reversed with a change in policy from the USA. This is a trend which has been, yes, maybe facilitated by a change, by a diminishing strong transatlantic relations during the Trump era, but it's not going backwards right now.
Right. Any more questions for Stefania, for Garima? Trying to look at the European perspective from that side. Okay, I think Constantino, you can take the questions in the interim, and we'll see.
So I mean, one issue is on this whole democracy business and values, etc. Garima, what's the sense in Europe? Maybe you can tell us on, can we expect a more missionary Europe, less? I don't know, or is this important? Neutralism? I have my own views, but you have your own, so I'm interested to know what's happening.
I don't think so, Constantino. I think this, you cited the R2P debate. Certainly Europe has moved away from that. We would find differences when it comes to Europe's own neighborhood. There too, with the protests in Belarus, for example, we haven't really seen any, robust responses coming from the EU. So I doubt that this whole idea of proselytizing and etc. or interfering in that sense would take root. And I noticed that you mentioned even on the question of Maldives, where the EU's assistance in the Maldives was actually coordinated behind the scenes with India. I remember a couple of years ago when there was a crisis situation there. So I definitely feel that even in South Asia, the assessment in Europe has shifted dramatically, and what we are talking about is not, time from 5 years ago, but perhaps you see it differently.
I think I just get a sense that several leaderships across this region are a bit nervous about it. So let's see. And I think they're nervous, and for good and bad reasons, but are tracking it carefully, right? Given the appointments within the Biden administration, given the traditional, that it's not so far back, it's 10, 15 years ago, there was a really strong push that shaped the global order tremendously. And in fact, if I may say, also disrupted many countries and regions and left a lot of scars and a lot of ruins around. There's some concern about that, but good to hear that. Maybe I agree with you. Actually, I'm skeptical about that return, but I think if I had to bet, there would be a bit more a return of that emphasis, a bit, not back to those levels, but it'll come back again. If not only, Garima, this is something you've tracked also in Brussels, because of the domestic constituencies in those countries, right? There are expectations from civil society, from a variety of advocacy groups, and from the electorate at large in the European Union about the European Union's terms of engagement with more or less illiberal actors or more or less democratic actors, etc. Those can be irritants. So sometimes it's not generally the state policy, but I think there's a case to be made that those issues can irritate the relationship between the European Union and, forget India, but Sri Lanka, Myanmar, where the US has actually returned, even under the Trump presidency, to a more interventionist and more sort of more sanction-oriented approach. And China, of course, another example. That's beyond the region. I just want to make 2 points, Dadish. One is we've not talked much about it. Actually, Mathew Simon spoke most about it, but nothing will work unless there's a strong revival of the economic agenda of cooperation. And I'm not saying only the EU-India one, which I think Mathew was mentioning, but the larger EU engagement with this region in terms of trade and investments facilitation. Mathew mentioned a few agreements from the 90s and 2000s, and if you look at that chronology, it's remarkable that there has been very little progress, not only with India, the deal stalled post 2014, 7 to 14, in terms of an agreement there, but also with the other neighboring countries of India and the region. We're talking about the region mostly here. So I think that's a good point that deserves a bit of a scrutiny in seeing beyond India, how also the EU's various economic engagements, in particular with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, right? Bangladesh is graduating as a middle income country. Sri Lanka has faced an extension, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of its special status for EU, for imports to for exports to the EU. So that's what. So that's one on the economic centrality of all this. I know you have other panels on that, but I wanted to make sure that we can talk all about politics, strategy, and security. But if that economic engagement is not there, we will have more business as usual with China, and for obvious reasons, because I think every single country in this world needs to grow, especially post-COVID. The imperative of immediate, expedient growth and development for countries, even more in this region than in the West, I would say, in developed countries, because as we see again in Nepal, there's a massive need for infrastructure financing to modernize these economies. Now, on the questions from Jana Lemke, I think from Berlin, and Ambassador Nona de Prez, I think she's the ambassador of the EU to Kathmandu, about the role of values in democracy. I think Ambassador de Prez had mentioned, the EU is not neutral nor preachy. We reach out to others and are assertive. I think that was her in the chat, the message. And I think Jana Lemke's question was related to that. 2 points on this. It's good to hear, and it certainly has happened. I think the Maldives example that Garima mentioned speaks to that the EU is much more willing in reaching out, coordinating, and cooperating at a strategic level of assessments on what's happening with third countries in the region with India. So that basically means that there's a stronger dialogue and regular dialogue, a more periodic dialogue than there was 10 years ago now, on what's happening in the third countries in this region. So this is the EU-India talking about what's happening in Myanmar, and Nepal, and Sri Lanka. And I think that needs to be sustained, and I think we're on the right track, but I think that needs to be expanded much more. I keep hearing from both European Union and Indian officials that, there is still not an optimal level of coordination, information sharing, and just exchanging assessments, right? So that's important. And then you choose whoever you want to do it with, not only India, but India obviously being the central actor plays an important role, but also other countries that are important in this region. And let me highlight the role of Japan here. Second and last point is the question about values and democracy is not if, but how. I hope to maybe I was not clear enough. It's not whether norms should be. Norms are always there. But how do you transmit those norms and values in your foreign policy? That's a dilemma that all countries face in different variety of degrees. But it's not that you need to be either neutral or preachy. It's exactly that middle ground that needs to be explored more. And it's about two things. It's about the method and the tone. So that needs to change from a negative to a positive one. And I think the European Union is doing much better today than it was 15 to 20 years ago. And that's a function of necessity and of pragmatism that shows that the European Union is also becoming more strategic, and I may say pragmatic actor in great power politics. That was not the case 15 years ago. So that tone and method needs to change, or more of it. I think it's on the right track again, but it needs to change more. The second issue is on the how, is on the topics and issues. I mean, we can talk about democracy, human rights, elections, monitoring, observing, judging, again, the tone issue, or we can look much more at a positive agenda, which is policy. So from less politics, more policy. And by policy, I mean institutional resilience, rule of law in the basic governance way, data privacy, which I think someone had mentioned before. Those are the sectors that are productive and fertile for a stronger EU capacity building presence in this region. Again, I'm not looking at India. Look at these other countries that are sandwiched often between two competitive models, and a sort of Indian American and a Chinese one, and are dying to get capacity building, capital, and expertise from the European Union. That's where I see a proactive agenda for the EU to shift its normative focus away from the political angle and more towards the policy, institutional governance angle.
Yeah, and actually, Constantino and the others, I'll be happy to hear from you that, one of the aspects on this whole aspect of strategy is, can we look at more decentralized approach by the European Union to South Asia? And in that context, how will probably cooperation with India fit into that? For example, we could just look at South Asia as being one monolith in geopolitical terms, how we saw it traditionally, or we could see as maritime South Asia, Himalayan South Asia, the Bay of Bengal community, and actually try to coordinate policy in terms of more supple minilaterals, which will probably get more bang for the buck than being able to try and get these huge institutional orders, which probably are not going to have traction in times where the rise of China is becoming a very, very predatory factor. So could you see, in the context of, let's say, an Indo-Pacific policy which might be framed, that the EU might be more willing to work with actors in decentralized manners to be able to get more optimized outcomes across the maritime and the continental stretch of South Asia? Any opinions on that?
I can jump in here. I think it's a very important point, but given the nature of the EU and how it is used in bureaucratic terms, how it is used to dealing with other organizations, I would find it very difficult, because even with, say, the German strategy, you saw the focus was on ASEAN, but also on institutions like the Indian Ocean Rim Association. They even mentioned BIMSTEC. But the agility that is required in dealing with plurilateral forums, minilaterals, I think that is missing, and it would be a big lift for the European Union and its member states. I'm leaving out France, because France and the UK understand dynamics in the region in a way that is different from others. So there is a need for Europeans to brush up on what are these different forums and how to be nimble enough to work with these. So institutionally, this goes against the grain of what the EU is used to. But I'm hoping that in whatever strategy they come up with, they do definitely understand how to work within trilaterals, with the Quad Plus or other forums. I think that would be quite useful.
Yeah. Mathew, any final comments from your side?
I would just add that we have sub-regional groups like BBM and BIMSTEC, that is, in South Asia. So I just want to, out of curiosity, apart from European Union, there are various other sub-regional groups. I just would like to know, I'm not aware of it, that are also having in terms on trade, they are working out certain agreements, or are there associations in that regard? Because we have European Free Trade Associations, so they also have an element, because if you want to decentralize it, then they basically, what was the central system? What we know is SAARC. But apart from that, we don't know any other agencies in South Asia. But then these sub-regional organizations are working functionally on issues of infrastructure and connectivity. So I think there is a scope in South Asia, but how it relates to other regional groups is another question. Thank you.
Right. So I think we've come to the end of a very fascinating session. All that remains for me to do is, on my behalf as the moderator, to thank the ambassador once again for his distinguished address. Also to my excellent panelists who've been able to really provide for a very enriching session. I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of what the European Union and South Asia can do, not just in terms of SAARC, which has been defining but has also been defunct for a long time, but to look at South Asia in a very different manner and situated differently within the canvas of the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, look at the European Union, not just in terms of it as an institution, but in terms of what it can do in terms of its individual member states. So thank you very much to Garima, Constantino, Mathew, and Stefania. And I'll now hand back to the host organizer to take proceedings forward. Mr. Sham? Are you there, Sham? Oh, I guess he's probably not there. So I guess we conclude proceedings here. Thank you very much. And good evening to everyone.
Thank
Have a
you,
nice day.
Ritesh.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.